Hello, my bariatric care friends, and welcome to this episode of the Weight Loss Winformation Podcast. And Happy New Year to everybody. This is the first recording of 2026, and that is relevant because we are using the bariatric care word of the year for this episode. And the word of the year is courage. Courage in your weight loss process. Why? Because this process takes a tremendous amount of courage. You may or may not have thought of it that way, but as we go through the content in this podcast episode, I think you're going to realize just how much courage you have, whether you think so or not. And we're also going to encourage you to take some healthy risks in boosting your courage because there are great outcomes when one does so. So specifically, what we're going to talk about in this episode is the reasons that courage is the weight loss winformation / bariatric care word of the year and what exactly courage is. Then we're going to talk about how this business of courage can help you as you go through the weight loss process and the weight maintenance process. And then finally, we'll talk about ways that you can boost your courage. I've got some really great resources that I'm using as part of this episode, and I will be sure to put those in the show notes so that you can look up some of this on your own. Now, this is something that as I was preparing for this podcast episode, I thought a lot of people may consider themselves courageous in some areas of their life, but they may think they lack courage in other areas of their lives. But I think as I go through the list that I've compiled about the reason that courage is required in the weight loss process, you're going to realize you have a lot more courage than maybe you give yourself credit for. And the reason is because whether or not you're consciously aware of it, there are a lot of changes that take place. If you're brand new to this weight loss process, whether you're taking a GLP-1 medication or you're choosing to have a surgical weight loss procedure, or if you're losing weight in any other way, if you're new to this process, you may or not be aware of the changes that are coming your way. But if you're a couple years into this or further along than that, you are already aware. It's not just the changes in what you eat and what you drink. Yeah, that's probably going to change if you're serious about getting weight off and keeping it off. But really, that's the obvious and just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to changes that take place in a person's life, because clearly the disease of obesity is a disease that affects every single area of your life. Your family relationships, your partnership relationships, your friendships, your relationships with extended family in a lot of cases, your relationship with the people you work with, maybe your spiritual life, maybe even your financial life. So this is something that affects all of your life. And so as you make changes in how you eat and the kinds of activities you engage in, there are quite a few changes, and a lot of these require tremendous amounts of courage. But as I said, the eating is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to changes. So you're probably already painfully aware of what some of those changes are. And I'm going to just ask you to think about this. A lot of the things that we've addressed in prior episodes of this podcast are related to issues or behaviors that require tremendous amounts of courage. And because I know a lot of you and work with a lot of you, I have seen some remarkable acts of courage. Just over the holiday break, I have had some interaction with some of the bariatric care members and some of the patients that I work with who have taken some amazingly healthy risks in their lives. And the way they feel about themselves following this is tremendous. And that's one of the benefits of taking healthy risks that require courage, which we'll talk about a lot more in detail. But let's talk about this weight loss process. Just beginning and making the choice to go on this journey, because it's not a week-long thing. It's not like your 2-week vacation from work and then you come back and it's all over. We know diets are like that, and we know that at the beginning of the year, a lot of people have made resolutions that will be ending within a couple of weeks. But that's not the way it is if you are on a serious weight loss journey. A serious weight loss journey begins with the decision to make that, and then maybe telling the people in your life about it. Telling the people in your life that you are making a decision to take a medication or to have a surgical procedure takes a lot of courage in and of itself. And one of the things that I know from working in this field for well over 20 years is that we tend not to give ourselves credit for the small or the big steps we take. So I want you right now to give yourself an emotional or mental or a physical high five, however that works for you, because when you made this decision, you had to share that information with the people who are closest to you, some of them who may not have been supportive of the decision that you were making. So not only did it take a lot of courage to make the decision, but it's taken a lot of courage to share that information with people who are going to be alongside you in this journey in one way or another, especially if they weren't as supportive as you would like for them to be. Maybe you've had to ask some of these people for their cooperation. If you live in the same household as other people and you're making some significant changes in your lifestyle, you might have to ask for their cooperation. That can require a tremendous amount of courage. So again, if you've done that, if you've asked the people in your sphere, whether they live with you or in your work environment, if you've asked for some cooperation or for some assistance, then again, give yourself credit for that, because it's something most people don't do enough of. Now, maybe you even have had to confront some people in your life who either they said, I'm not going to support you, or maybe they said they were going to support you, and yet their behavior doesn't match their words. They're using, oh yeah, I'm supporting, but their behavior is a little bit sabotaging. So maybe you've had to speak up for yourself and say, your words and your actions aren't matching. This behavior, whatever it is, maybe they're bringing food you've asked them not to bring into the house, or maybe they're asking you to go places where you've said that is not a safe place for me at this time in my journey. So maybe you have had to do that horrifying task of confronting people. That requires a whole lot of courage. And if you've ever done it, you know that it does. How about picking yourself up after a setback? I don't know anybody who's gone through the weight loss journey who hasn't had a setback or two. I don't know anybody who's done anything that is requiring effort for a long period of time who hasn't had some setbacks. I could tell you thousands of setbacks I've had in pursuing my dreams and goals in life, and you could probably do the same. So how do you handle it after a setback? In the past, maybe you just threw in the towel and went back to old behaviors, and that landed you in a heap of trouble. But if you're learning to get right back on, or not take as long if you have a setback to start back with your healthy habits, that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to say, you know what, I messed up, but I'm going to get right back up, and I'm going to start where I left off. So that is something that I'm hoping you're able to give yourself a lot of credit for. And if you haven't managed that one yet, well, the people at Berry Aftercare are here to help you. So if you haven't joined Berry Aftercare yet, something you might want to be doing. www.berryaftercare.com. What about asking for help? This is not something that people are real comfortable with. In the weight loss process, and hopefully in other areas of your life, you have come to the conclusion that, like all other human beings, you need help in some areas of your life. So if you have learned to be willing to ask for help, then you have demonstrated that you are willing to take some healthy risks that require courage. Here's one that a lot of people are sometimes really taken off guard by in the weight loss process. They're not ready for or do not expect to have these intense periods of big emotion. When you are in the weight loss process, sometimes things surface. There may be some prior issues, or maybe eating was keeping you from thinking about what's going on in your marriage, or maybe when you ate, you put away the stress of the work, and now you're being more mindful about what you're eating less, and so you have these emotions kind of coming in and attacking you from seemingly nowhere. They've been there all along, but the eating has kind of kept them at bay, and now you're struggling with some difficult emotions. Sitting with those emotions requires courage. Addressing those emotions and doing something about the issues related to those emotions requires tremendous amounts of courage. I'm not done yet with my list, but I hope you're catching on that in this weight loss process, you're already doing things that require a lot of courage. So if you think of yourself as not being very courageous, I'm hoping that as I go through this, you're recognizing that, wow, I guess I have demonstrated more courage along the way than I've given myself credit for. What about dealing with fears? In this weight loss process, there's a lot of fears involved. If you've listened to prior episodes, we've talked about the fears of failing, the fears of succeeding, the fears of acknowledging your different physical appearance and the way you move in the world. You know, how you move when you've lost 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds, that feels different. And that takes a lot of courage. And it requires courage to go into places you haven't been before, see people you haven't seen before. It takes courage to engage in conversation about the weight loss process. So there's probably a lot of things you've done that have required a lot of courage. Courage is also required in this process to make lasting changes. Most people who are in a long-term weight loss or weight maintenance phase of their process have dieted on and off for years, mostly unsuccessfully, because the old habits are very powerful. And it's easy when you're in a stressful situation, or when, as people tell me, life happens, it's easier to fall back into those old habits. So it takes a lot of courage to ask for help in sustaining these habits, to find accountability people, to maybe find a therapist, or to find a personal trainer, or to go back to the nutritionist. And also, sometimes in this process, people have to accept and become aware of and acknowledge some of the denial of things that they have held on to in past dieting efforts. Maybe they said, well, I eat pretty well, but when you really look at the evidence, if you've kept journals, you have to go, you know what, I said I did, but I really didn't. And I recognized that I would do things that, I feel ashamed about. I would eat a full meal and then go home and pretend like I was ready to sit down for dinner and I'd have another meal. Acknowledging some of the ways we minimized what we were doing in the past. That takes a lot of courage to maintain lasting changes as you go forward. So let's just face it here, friends. This whole weight loss process is infiltrated with issues requiring courage. So that was just a brief introduction to some of the things. Some of those things you may be really good at, some of those things you may still be struggling with. But I do want you to look at what you have done in a positive sense and recognize that all of those things have required courage. Now, let's talk about what courage is. We're talking about we have it, but what the heck is it? Well, when I was researching this, I kept reading, courage is something we all wish we had more of. It's this undefined thing, but it's like, I want more of it, and I really admire it when I see it in other people. So what the heck is this thing we're talking about? Well, there's a field of psychology called positive psychology. And what they say is that courage is an attribute or a thing that allows us to overcome personal limitations. And in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about a lot of associated characteristics that go along with courage, or that courage sort of requires. There's sort of a subset of attributes that are needed for a person to behave in a courageous manner, to take healthy risks, to obtain something they want. So I think it's the doing, it's that taking that healthy risk of doing something that may be intimidating or you may have intense fear about, and using all of these other characteristics that we're going to talk about and following through. That is courage. It's an act of courage. But positive psychology says that courage is a great way to help us overcome personal limitations. And they give the example of like fear or anxiety in order to pursue a full life. That fits perfectly into this weight loss process because most people embark on this journey with one of the goals being to live a fuller life, to pursue a fuller life, which may mean different things to different people. But typically what I hear is I want health, I want longevity, I want to be able to engage more fully with the people I love, do more activities. That requires overcoming some things. Because if you've struggled with weight for a long time, especially, then you know the fears associated with, am I going to be able to maintain these behaviors? Am I going to be able to do what it takes? Am I going to be able to say no to these things? Am I going to be able to deal with the emotions that surface when I'm without my coping mechanism, which is food for a lot of people, when life gets difficult, when stress happens, when life happens? So courage is something that we count on, or we muster up, or we, draw upon, and we build within ourselves to overcome things like fear and anxiety. Yes, it's normal to have these fears and anxieties as you go into the weight loss process, and there may be new ones that come up at different stages of the weight loss process. And I've often compared the weight loss process to like marriage, and there are different fears in the marital process too, right? It's like the fears of, oh my gosh, being together forever, or the fears of managing money together. Then maybe you have children later down the road, and there's fears of, how do we raise our children together? And maybe then the kids are gone, and there's fears of how do we do this empty nesting thing? Well, the weight loss process is similar, because as you start, it's like, oh my gosh, I have fears of, am I going to be able to do this? And maybe you're 3 or 4 or 5 years into it and you're doing it, and now your fears are, oh my goodness, I'm getting older, my metabolism is slowing down. Am I going to maintain a healthy weight? And there's fears related to that. And then you get even older and you're like, oh my gosh, now, with every decade, we have increased, fat deposits in our body. It's like, so there are different fears along the way. There are different fears about approaching people and setting boundaries. There are different fears that you're going to encounter when it comes to people making comments about your weight loss, and what do I say, and how do I set these boundaries? So at different stages, there are different fears. Those are normal and expected. So if you're like, oh, I shouldn't have these fears, try to push that aside. Let that float on past like a cloud floating through the sky, because fears and anxieties are normal. It's learning to feel the fear and do it anyway, and that is what courage is about. I recognize that I have fear about this, but I want the outcome. So I'm going to go ahead and follow through, and we'll talk about what you need to kind of bolster that to be able to do. So a lot of healing. Clinical psychology says that courage is very commonly thought of in the world of psychology as something that leads to healing. I 100% believe this, because maybe one of the things that you're facing in your journey is asking somebody you love to keep a certain food out of your presence. And that could be a scary thing to do. When you learn to do that and you've done that, it's like, wow, you feel so powerful. You feel like you've mastered something. And it really does help us heal. It helps us realize that we have the ability to do something that maybe we thought we didn't. Interestingly, as I was preparing for this podcast, I have a sister. I have a lot of sisters, but one in particular who has been a people pleaser to the extent that the woman has been walked all over. And she's aware that she is very much responsible for not setting boundaries for herself. And this is something she's really working on. And it coincided with this whole preparation for this Courage podcast. And she sent me this text the other day. She said, I can't believe I did this. She said, it took so much courage for me to do this. And she actually set a healthy boundary for herself in regard to how much time she would watch her neighbor's children, because the neighbor has been pawning the children off on her and then saying, I'll be back whenever, and not coming back for hours later. So she was so proud of herself, and I was so impressed with her for doing that. And so I've been sharing some of the information from this podcast, but it was so fun to hear her talk about how proud she was of herself for doing the actual doing. And I talk about doing a lot in the weight loss process and on this podcast, because, the effort, I talk about the 4 ACEs, and effort is the E in that word. If you don't put forth the effort, there will be no results. The effort is the doing part. And that is what results in the healing. It's kind of like the gotta do's with the weight loss. They're the behavioral things that you've got to do if you want to lose weight and maintain the weight loss. And there's no way around it. There are things you've just got to accept and do if you want to maintain a healthy weight. The same is true when it comes to getting results that you want in your life and feeling good about them, like setting the boundaries with somebody, or standing up for yourself in a situation, or speaking up and saying, I'd prefer not to go to a buffet. That's not a safe place for me at this point in my process. That requires tremendous amounts of courage, but the healing from that spills over into every area of your life, because once you know you can do it, then you can do it in other areas as well. And I love that. I love that. So I found an article in Psychology Today, and it was written by a Dr. Shahram Heshmat, which I could be saying wrong, and I really apologize. But some of the information that I'm going to share with you now comes from this article. And he says that there are several factors that are said to be crucial in the development and improvement of courage. So remember, I said if you're going to have courage to do something that moves you toward a goal that you desire, there are some things that are kind of subsumed. Let's say we have like a catcher's mitt, all right? So you have a catcher's mitt on, and inside that catcher's mitt, you're holding all of these other things. And these other things are what the catcher's mitt is, the courage, okay? It exemplifies courage. And inside of that, you're holding on to several things. So we're going to talk about what those things are that help a person have this courage to do whatever it is they need to do. Now, I'm going to point out to you as I go through this list of some of the things that I think are problematic for many of the people with whom I work. And this is not only relevant to people in the weight loss arena, although most of my patient population are people working through weight loss. This applies to people everywhere. So don't think that this information I'm sharing with you, if I go, yeah, this is a problem here, this pertains to most of humanity. But because I work in this area, I'm going to point out when I'm like, I see this as an issue for a lot of people. All right, so in this article, Dr. Shahram says, these are the factors that are crucial for the development and improvement of courage. The first one is having a meaningful goal. Well, hello, I think that one we got going for us here. A meaningful goal in the context of the Weight Loss Winformation Podcast anyway, is to lose weight and maintain that weight loss. That is a very, very meaningful goal. And we've talked many times in the podcast episodes about keeping your why front and center, because every time we re-examine or look at our why, it's motivation to keep doing these difficult things. So your meaningful goal, in this case anyway, that helps you with courage is, I want to lose and maintain this weight loss. Therefore, if setting a boundary with somebody so that they don't bring around this kryptonite food that sends me into a tailspin is something I have to do, I have to remember why I want this goal. So most of us, at least in the arena of weight loss, have this going for us. So in your catcher's mitt, that is courage. You've got that meaningful goal. So remember, this courage, what that does is this goal helps us have a sense of purpose, and that lowers our anxiety. So let's say, your anxiety in general about doing courageous acts or setting boundaries with people, your anxiety is at like an 8. Well, with this meaningful goal of losing weight and maintaining that weight loss, that intensity, the intensity of that goal can lessen that anxiety to maybe a 5 or a 6. Now it's still there, but having this goal, this purpose, helps to reduce that anxiety and motivate my willingness to follow through with this difficult behavior. All right, so we got to have a meaningful goal in our glove. Another thing is there's got to be fear. There's quotes out there that talk about there's no courage without fear. If we're not afraid of something, we don't need any courage to overcome it. So fear is going to be an absolute part of doing whatever it is that's going to take courage on our part. So the fear may be telling your mother, I don't want you bringing your baked goods to my house. It may be telling your coworkers, I would prefer you not ask me to go out to lunch with you. It may be telling your partner, I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't bring pizza to our house. I'm not asking you not to eat pizza, but could you eat it elsewhere? So that takes a lot of courage. And there might be some fear when we want to express that to people because we don't want to make people mad. We don't want them mad at us. We don't want them thinking that we're bossing them around. But there is no courage without fear. And there's a Mark Twain quote that says, listen to this carefully because it's important. Courage isn't the lack of fear. It's the acting in spite of it. So it's very well known that for courage, a courageous act to take place, there's got to be some fear. It's not that there's not going to be fear. It's, I'm going to do it anyway. Because part of it is I have this meaningful goal. So in our baseball mitt, that is courage, we have a goal and we have some fear. Now, I like what the article says. The author of this article says, facing fear when the odds are in your favor makes fewer demands on you. In other words, if it's a small risk, if there's a little bit of fear involved, it's not that big a deal. But if you're facing a big thing, if you have to go in and have a confrontation with your boss about something, that might be a big, big fear. So the idea here, and we'll get to this again later, is try some things that aren't so big. It's like if you were to list your confrontational fears in a row. So maybe you have fear of telling your kid to clean their room. You shouldn't have that fear, but whatever. Maybe that has a scale of 1 fear on it. Maybe asking your sister to not offer to take you out to, some fast food or dessert. Maybe there's a fear level of 3 or 4 there. Maybe, talking to your mother who loves to bake and shows her love for you by baking, maybe asking her or telling her, I don't want you to bring those to my home. Maybe there's a fear factor of like 6 or 7 associated with that. So the idea here is try this out when the odds are in your favor, when there's a low fear factor, because it helps you to boost your courage. And we'll get to that more tips on that later, but that one was just thrown in this article. So I thought I'd post it, right? Or I'd bring it up in this part of the conversation. So, in our glove of courage, so far we've got a meaningful goal. We've got some fear. That's okay. In the AA world, they say feel the fear and do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it anyway. It's a mantra. Feel the fear, do it anyway, because it's going to lead to something good that I want. All right, the third thing is self-confidence. Now, here is an area where I see an issue. Again, not just for people who have struggled with weight. Although I will say, if you've been a person who's been marginalized for any reason, maybe it's because of your weight, maybe it's because when you were a kid, you had a stutter and other kids picked on you, and so it affected your self-confidence, or maybe you were no good at sports and you were always picked last when they were choosing teams at recess, and maybe that affected your self-confidence, or maybe it was being called names by your siblings or your parents or whatever. Things that have attacked our self-confidence. And we've talked in prior episodes about big T trauma, little t trauma. There are things that many of us take to heart very deeply, especially in our childhood years, that leave us lacking in self-confidence as we get older. And I will say, for those people who struggle with weight and have been picked on mercilessly for many, many years, there's no way that cannot have affected your self-confidence. So because self-confidence, believing in yourself, believing that you can meet the demands of a task, so believing I can go up and I can ask for help. I can go up and ask for what I want from, I can ask my mom not to bring those things. I can ask my friends if we could go to, but that's terrifying if you're a person whose self-esteem is at a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 because of the kinds of things you've had to deal with in the past. And I do believe that people who have struggled with weight, especially from childhood, and again, it's not everybody, but a lot of people have been picked on so badly that there's no way it couldn't have affected your self-esteem. You may have wonderful self-esteem in terms of your capabilities at work. You may have wonderful self-esteem in the areas of being a good parent, but there's been a hit to your self-esteem somewhere along the line. And for people who struggle with weight, I've seen this in a lot of ways. So that means that you might need to bolster this area. You might need to get some help. You might need to ask yourself, how do I talk to myself? Because if you're talking to yourself negatively, you're just beating yourself up at this point. Do you remind yourself, I can do this? It will be scary, but I can do this. And a belief that you can do it will make a huge difference when the time comes to implement that courageous action. So believing that you can do it, even if you haven't done it before, and even if you have some fear, that's okay. A confident person is more likely to persist in the face of obstacles. So when you think back on diets that you didn't stick to maybe in the past, then it's difficult to have that confidence that you're going to be able to do it this time. When you've done something 12 times and you haven't followed through, it's difficult to all of a sudden say, yeah, I got this. It just doesn't make sense. It's almost like if you were going to, perform on stage, and every time you got onto stage, you froze and nothing would come out your mouth. It's kind of difficult to think that the 15th time would be any different than the first 14. But this is something we have to overcome and work on. So self-confidence is one of the things that is in the mitt of courageous action, courage. So if this is an area where you're lacking, then this is an area where you can get some help to improve your self-confidence. And self-confidence comes from what we did at the very beginning of this podcast episode, which is saying, you know what? This required courage, and I did it. You know what? This required courage so far in this process, and I did that. And every time we do something that we're proud of, we develop more self-confidence. Now, you can borrow self-confidence from other areas in your life. So if you're not real self-confident in the arena of following through with weight loss because you don't have a track record for it, then borrow from other areas of your life. You go, you know what? I do have a good track record in self-confidence, knowing that I pay my bills on time, knowing that I show up at work on time, knowing that I meet deadlines at work. So I do have self-confidence. So I'm going to borrow some from there, and I'm going to put it in my little baseball mitt, and I'm going to use it to set my healthy boundaries in this arena. So borrow it from where you have it in other areas, recognizing, okay, if I want to increase my self-confidence in this particular arena, setting boundaries, then I'm going to remind myself that I have it in other areas and I can develop it here as well. All right, so another thing that Dr. Shahram Heshmat says in his article is that we need to be able to manage our feelings well. This, my friends, is another area in which I see the majority of adults struggle. So let's just do a little bit of me asking you some questions and you being honest with yourself. Okay, here we go. And let me tell you something. This is an area that, it took me well into my 50s to feel fairly confident most of the time. Not even all the time. And I started working on this when I was around 30. So these are things we work on over the course of our lifetimes. But how well do you do with managing your feelings? So we're talking about emotional regulation here. If you're super angry, how well do you manage that? Now, my guess is most of us manage it much better in public than we do in our homes. So you might say, well, I manage my anger pretty well. You know, I don't go blasting people at work, but how do you talk to your kids? How do you talk to your spouse? Do we take stuff out on the people we love the most? I don't know. But the author of this article says the ability to self-regulate, in other words, behave yourself appropriately, not have feelings, but manage them under intense challenges is an important skill for courageous individuals. If you are an emotional eater, ding, 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 chances are you're not managing your emotions as well as you might think you are. Because one of the coping skills that people use is food for when they have intense emotions. It's not the healthiest way to manage emotions. So healthier ways of managing your emotions we've talked about in other episodes are, writing them down, talking to somebody, going outside in your car and screaming where nobody else is, all of those kinds of ways to manage intense emotions. But if you're eating at your feelings, that's not managing your feelings in a healthy way. So this may be an area where you also need to start to work on those things. Are you a reactive person? Are you the person who goes into the restaurant and think everybody's looking at them, what you're eating? That's been an issue for a lot of people who are overweight because they have had people make fun of them in the past. And so it's normal and natural to maybe think, oh, they're watching me what I eat. But the truth is probably most people aren't. So these are kinds of things that you need to work on. A lot of us tend to want to think we can read minds or make assumptions. Well, those people over there, they're talking about me, they're making fun of me. They may be, but chances are they're not. Or when we say things like, well, they're just doing that because they're jealous. That irritates me. You've heard me say this a million times because we don't have the right. You don't want people making assumptions about why you're doing what you're doing. You don't want somebody to say, well, she's doing that because she's jealous. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but it's not up to them to decide, nor is it up to us to decide what anybody else is thinking. So these are not managing our emotions really well. Managing our emotions in that case would be, you know what, I'm feeling a little paranoid that people are watching me. I'm going to make up my mind that it doesn't matter if they're watching me or not, because I'm in charge of what I'm doing and what they think doesn't matter. And that leads to another way of not really managing our feelings really well is a lot of people take things super personally. So if you're a person who is like so deeply wounded when, you know, maybe an example would be you're sitting at the table and people are talking and you're feeling like nobody's hearing you, but you don't speak up. And you take it very personally. Nobody cares what I have to say. Nobody cares what I think. But you're not saying, excuse me, I'd like to share my opinion. So that's not a way of handling your emotions really well either. This is one of the biggest problems that I think all people have. We haven't been taught to manage our emotions. We're very defensive. We're very outward focused. It's their fault. They're doing this to me. They're thinking this. They're doing that. That's not healthy management of feelings. I might need to do a whole episode on that. I think I will. Because that is a hallmark of not only having courage. It's required to have courage, but it's also a hallmark of how healthy of an adult are you. You know, what the author of this article says is humor is a solid characteristic of people who have courage because they're not so worried. You know, if what they plan to do crashes and fails, they're not so worried about, oh my God, what did they think of me? Or, oh my God, now I'm so embarrassed. Big deal. Have a little humor. Don't take yourself or life so seriously. And a lot of us tend to do that. So one of the things we want to have in our glove is the ability to manage our feelings. So if that's a weakness for you, again, that's an area where we can grow and we can get help. Trust me, I've had to be working on this, like I said, for forever. All right, another one is being authentic. Now, here's another one that people who have struggled with weight oftentimes struggle with. In this article, they're defining authenticity as being the person you claim to be. A lot of times, everybody, not just people who've struggled with weight, but everybody do this thing called impression management. We try to make a positive impression on people. And so maybe at home, we're like, crabby Kathy, or we're, sulky Susie, or we're negative Nellie. But out in public, boy, we got the smile on our face and we're volunteering to do everything. And you're just the happiest person I ever met, but it's not authentic. It's an impression management tactic. I want you to like me. I want you to accept me. I want you to appreciate me. I want you to approve of me. And that is something that people who have been made fun of or marginalized or picked on really struggle with, because that's a tough thing to go through. And so, of course, there's this impression management. I want to be included. It's a normal, healthy human need. I want to be accepted. I want to be approved of. But sometimes the person we are in public is not the same person we are at home. So authenticity is being the person you claim to be. If you're acting like you're all happy all the time, but you're at home being really somebody that's hard to live with because you're such a crabby person, that's not really very authentic. So what the author of this article says is that courageous people are willing to face unpleasant truths about themselves without getting defensive or trying to rationalize. This is one of the biggest struggles all humans have. If somebody points out to us that we have a flaw or we have a character defect or we've done something that's inappropriate or whatever, we have a tendency to want to defend ourselves. We want to say, well, it wasn't that big of a deal, or we try to rationalize it away. It's because we're feeling shame. And this is almost everybody. None of us wants to be like, oh my God, yeah, I did that. It can get easier, but I can still feel it sometimes. And if, like, the same sister pointed something out to me the other day about how we both have issues we need to work on. And I felt a little sting, even though I knew it was true and I didn't defend or protect, but it was like, oh, when people point something out to us that is true, it stings a little bit. But we don't need to defend or protect. We just need to, if it's true, it's true. If it's not true, we don't have to defend it. That's their opinion, right? So this is a tough one. Having in our mitt what helps with courage is being authentic. What about empathy? How are you with empathy? A lot of people are very good with this, But courageous people really have the ability to see other people's points of view. Now, I'm going to say 2 words, and you tell me where you're at with empathy on this. Politics and religion. How willing are you to see other people's views without getting angry or defensive or thinking in your mind about all the names you want to call them? Having empathy is really important to be courageous. Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says, seek first to understand and then be understood. But most of us seek first to be understood. I want you to understand my point of view. I want you to tell me you acknowledge me, and then I might listen to what you have to say, but I'm just going to tell you you're wrong anyway. That's how most of us are. Empathy says, okay, you come from this place. It makes sense to me that you might feel that way. Do you have empathy? Courageous people are able to see other people's points of view. It doesn't mean you agree with them or support them or are in favor, but you can have empathy and say, okay, I can understand. It's okay for you to have a different opinion. Ooh. How about situational demands or rising to the occasion? Courageous people rise to the occasion, and I think I fall very short in this situation. I don't see myself as one in some situations. It depends on the situation, right? If there's a medical situation, I'm going to shrink and fall behind the crowd. I'm not going to be the hero. I'm not real courageous in those situations. If it's a situation where everybody's, wanting to say something, I'm happy to be the spokesperson for the group. That doesn't bother me. So know your strengths and weaknesses. And some of these things are things that we can work on. Social connectedness. Now, this is an issue where I have seen a lot of people who are amazingly socially connected. And I don't mean they know a lot of people. I mean they have solid, good support people. And having a good social support network does a lot in terms of courage, because if you have people saying, listen, I'll practice this with you, the setting boundaries with your mom, I'll role play it with you, I'll be here for you, you can call me after you've talked to her, I'll celebrate with you if it goes well, and I'll commiserate with you if it doesn't go well. But we have these people who have our back. You provide social support. And that helps reduce anxiety and stress too. So that's another thing that goes in your mitt of courage. And if you don't have social support, this is something we all need when it comes to weight loss and weight maintenance too. So there are a lot of support groups out there, Bariatric Care being one of them, where people have developed amazing friendships, and they are very supportive of one another, and they help people take courageous steps and celebrate with them. All right, last thing he says in this article is that think about courage as being like a muscle, and you can develop it over time. As I said a little while ago, try some small things that require low levels of courage, things that you don't have a lot of anxiety or a lot of fear about. And as you master those, it can kind of build your courage, and you're strengthening those muscles. And remember, some people are born with traits that are more, they have more courage than others, just naturally. Just like some people are more athletically inclined than I am. I suppose that I could work on that, but I'm not a naturally athletic person. So I would have to work harder than somebody who is naturally athletic to develop those muscles. But practicing these small acts of courage help you become more courageous. So let me just kind of summarize that. All right, so we've got this baseball mitt, and that is courage, all right? And the more of these things you have in that mitt, the easier it's going to be for you to engage in acts of courage. So having that meaningful goal, recognizing that there's going to be fear and that that's okay, having self-confidence, having the ability to manage your feelings in healthy ways, being genuine, authentic, having empathy, being connected socially, and having some wins under your belt, having done some courageous things. So all of these things will help you to develop the courage muscle. So that is one way of looking at the factors that are crucial in the development of courage. So if you know you're weak in some of those things, work on those because it will help you develop your courage. Now, let's move on and talk about how courage can help with this weight loss process. All right. Now, there's a writer named Robert Wilson, and he wrote an article called Courage is a Pivotal State That Can Change Everything. I think this guy is onto something because I think once we have a few rounds of success with courageous acts, it really opens up a world of possibilities that we may not currently see for ourselves. But when we take a healthy risk, which is implementing courage, and we see the benefits of it, we are more and more likely to take more and more healthy risk for ourselves. And it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. So let's talk about this because this Robert Wilson talks about courage is sort of a mindset. It's a state of consciousness. It's like, yeah, I have fear, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to take these risks. I'm going for it. I got one life to live, and I am going to make it count. He says when you step into courage, so in other words, people say things like, I could never do that. I could never do that. Now, it might be walking on the moon, which most of us probably think I could never go through the training for that. But when it comes to everyday things that most of us really actually face in our lives, like setting a boundary with somebody and people are like, oh my God, I could never do that. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. A healthy adult should be able to set a healthy boundary with other people. And that is something you can learn and overcome. And when you do that, that is what helps you develop that self-confidence, that willingness to try other things. He says when you step into courage, and I love that, just think about, I am stepping into courage. I am making the choice to take a step, just like you made a courageous step to do something about your weight and your health and your lifestyle. It's stepping into the process. He says a shift occurs in your psyche that is life-changing. And I 100% believe it. I 100% believe it. He says when you step into this courage, it changes the way you feel and think about yourself. It's very, very empowering. And that's why it's wise to start with a small risk. Like maybe you're a person who doesn't like to go into a store by yourself. Well, have your friends sit in the car and you walk into the store, maybe just walk right back out. That was taking a small risk, but it was something that you could do that you could succeed at. So maybe next week you plan in your mind and you're like, I'm going to go into that store and I'm going to stay in there for 5 minutes all by myself. Do it. These are the kinds of things that help increase your belief in yourself and your willingness to take a next step. But it's very empowering. When I heard my sister and listened to her and talk about what it felt like to her, because for me, that is nothing. But there are other things that would be a huge risk for me, like talking to people about money and saying, you owe me such and such amount of money. That is a horrifying risk for me. And for other people, it's no big deal. So we got to know what our areas of fear are and what are small risks we can take to achieve success and do those things. So stepping into courage is really empowering. It's like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have my social network. And that's why that social network is so important. They're going to be behind me and with me in the journey. He says, when you step into courage, you worry less about change. You worry less about setbacks because it's like, well, if that doesn't work, I'll try again. And so it's like, you know what? If I fell off the food wagon this afternoon, it's okay because I know that I'm going to jump right back on and not despair for the next 3 weeks about this human slip up. All right. When you step into courage, he says, you don't care what people think about you. Now, I don't know that stepping into courage all by itself is going to do this, but I think it's a matter of maturation. I think it's a matter of practice. I think it's a matter of working through your own insecurities. I think the more insecurities we have, the more it matters to us what other people think. And so these are things that we can work on. Another thing is when you have these successes with small acts of courage, you realize I'm stronger than I think I am. And that's why I started this episode with, look at all the things you've already done. You're stronger and more courageous than you probably think you are. He says, when you start applying courage to every area of your life, he says it's transformative. And I believe that. If you say, I'm going to take a risk to set a boundary, and then you say, I'm going to take a risk to ask somebody for help, or I'm going to take a risk to ask somebody for something that I want, like a job or a raise or whatever. It can translate into all of these areas of your life. And pretty soon it's like, what have I got to lose? I might as well ask. I have taught my children from a very young age, if you want something, ask for it. If they say no, it's not a personal slight. There's a reason for it. I mean, I do wild things like I go onto Mel Robbins' website and I ask to be on her podcast. So far, it's not happened, but you never know. So what? I don't care. Mel might think I'm an ant and she wants to smash me, and that's okay. What do I care? I got nothing to lose by asking for what I want. So neither do you. If you want something in life, you got to go for it, you know? All right, sometimes the answer is yes, and whoa, what happens then? All right, he says courage is liberating because you lessen your fear, you lessen your anxiety. We build these things up. Maybe, we build up, setting a boundary with our mother to a 10 on a scale of fear and anxiety. When, is it really? It's your mother. Now, I've heard of some others that maybe it should be a 10, but most of the time, not really. All right, and then learning to accept what you can fix and work toward, things you want to change. Some things, it's acknowledging the serenity prayer. Accept what I can't change their opinion, can't change what they think, but I can take a healthy risk to make my life better. All right, anything that moves you out of fear, says this author, is an antidote to fear. So it can be anger. A lot of people are motivated by anger. It's going to move you out of fear, right? Taking a solid risk moves you out of fear. Having knowledge and understanding can take you out of fear. All right. And then he says, take baby steps. Take low consequence risks in order to gradually improve courage. So it might be going into a store by yourself. It might be going out to eat by yourself. It might be asking people at the office if you could go to a restaurant where there's a healthy option for you. It may be, and then you're increasing, right? Then you can say to your mom, because you've had some success with taking these risks and you're feeling better about yourself. And then you can say to your mom, don't come over here if you're going to bring baked goods. Well, mom wants to come over. So eventually she'll quit bringing the baked goods. I had a client once who said she would tell her mom and her mom would keep bringing crap. So when her mom would bring the crap, the woman would take the crap and go out and put it on her mom's trunk, not have it in the house. So there you go. So take some healthy risks. Ask your community to support you. Now, finally, ways to boost your courage. And this information comes from Susanna Nuusanen, who's a philosopher and a writer. And she wrote an article called The Guide to Being Courageous, Tips to Face What You Fear with Confidence. And she acknowledges, like you and I have, that courage isn't easy. It's not been easy for you any step of the way on your weight loss journey. And you have taken so many risks and faced so many courageous things already. Give yourself credit for those and remind yourself, I've done hard things. I can do more hard things. So she said, fear is going to sneak in. And sometimes that fear threatens to paralyze us. And sometimes that paralysis seems to win. That's okay. You can do it again the next day and maybe make it a little further. Call on your support people and say, I got paralyzed by my fear. I know people who are doing some sorting out of things in their house and they get overwhelmed and paralyzed by the overwhelmed to get anything done. That's okay. Ask people for help. It says, she says that fear has a tendency to take the reins and it steers us toward pain. However, courage, on the other hand, opens the door to power, opens the door to choice, to excitement, to action. And that's where we want to be. So we can give in to fear, which shuts things down, or we can open ourselves up to courage. But a lot of times we can't do this on our own. That's why we need our friends. So even though we take courageous steps, it doesn't mean that the fear disappears. But she says that courage is the act of moving forward in spite of it. Remember, at the very beginning, I said in the 12 steps, there's a very common phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And I always remind adults that we expect children to do a lot of things that must be really, really scary for them. Go to practice at 7 years old on a sports team where you know no one. That's got to be terrifying. But we're like, come on, go get in there. Or go to a classroom where you know no one, or enter a class in the middle of the year because you've moved. We expect kids to do a lot of these really scary things, and yet we give ourselves outs on things that are no more scary than what we've asked them to do. So feel the fear and do it anyway. Those mantras, a great tool. Feel the fear, do it anyway. So what Susanna Nusanen says is, here's some tips to help you face that fear and do it anyway. Acknowledge the fear. Don't act like you're not afraid. Acknowledge it. Tell it. I see you. I feel you. I know you're here. But you're not going to stop me. It's like talk to the fear. Let it know that you are an adult and you're going to take a step through the fear. Identify why the fear is there. Maybe it's uncertainty. Maybe it's unknown. Maybe the fear is about another person's opinion. Maybe it's because you have so much writing on this. You're like, oh, if I don't succeed at this, oh my gosh, then what are people going to think? Or how am I going to feel? Or whatever it is. But understanding where this fear comes from can help you work with it rather than against it. All right, I know that you're here. I know that if I try this and I don't succeed, well, I'm not going to get in that PhD program, or I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to be on that team, or I'm not going to get that promotion. Well, then I'll move in another direction. It's not going to be the end of me. And again, she says, start small. Acknowledge your fear, talk to it, identify the reason it's there, and then start small. Take tiny, tiny steps. And that's why we encourage people in the bariatric world to don't start with a big exercise goal. Start with something small. Start with something you can do, because that small goal that's doable increases your sense of self-worth and increases your motivation in turn. So take a step, take a small step, then another and another. And each small action builds momentum. And you've heard this before, and this author says the same thing. Engage in positive self-talk. Encourage yourself the way you would somebody else. How many times have you heard this? Are you doing it? Are you working to change the way you talk to yourself? Had a woman tell me today, she lost weight, she's regained weight, now she's working on losing the weight, which is very courageous. But I don't know if she intended for me to hear this or intended to say this, but she said, I'll still look in the mirror and say, you're a fat pig. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's back up there and watch the self-talk, because you're just berating yourself, and that is self-sabotage. So this applies to everything, including increasing your level of courage and taking those courageous acts. So engage in positive self-talk, or at least shut off the negative self-talk. Remind yourself of your strengths. Remind yourself of the steps you have taken that have already been courageous. And if you need to listen to the beginning of this podcast again to remind yourself of some of what those are, then do it. It wouldn't hurt you to literally write out in paper and pen what you have done that has been courageous and moved you forward on this journey so far, so that you've reminded yourself, I've done this, I've taken steps, I can take yet another. Here's another one that we recommend highly in all of the bariatric work that you do, is to celebrate each step of the way. And this is what this author says about courage. Celebrate every step of courage. My sister couldn't wait to tell me about what she had done, and I couldn't wait to celebrate with her because that was a big, big thing. I know what a doormat she has been, and I know how scary this was for her, and I know that it was great for her to share that with me, and it was so fun to celebrate that with her. Another thing, and this is tough for the weight loss community, get comfortable with failure. Oh my gosh, that is like a horrible thought to people. What do you mean get comfortable with failure? Because so many people have failed, in quotes, in so many ways when it comes to this weight loss thing. But you know what? It doesn't have, remember, we've talked so much about failure and how using it as a lesson, or it's human to make mistakes. So when we make mistakes, get right back up and start where you were instead of wallowing in that for days. So get comfortable with mistakes. Mistakes are a part of life. Failure is a part of life. We're going to have missteps. We're going to fall. We're going to fail. So no big deal. Say, all right, where do I start? Right now. Recall when you were last courageous. Having this recall of things that you did that was courageous. Like I said, write it down on a piece of paper so you remember, I have done courageous things and I can do more. Think about your growth, give yourself credit for that, and definitely step out of your comfort zone. So there's a lot of benefits to taking courageous steps, but there's more to it, as we've discussed in this episode. All those things that go into being more courageous that you may not have ever thought about, like self-confidence and some of those other things, managing your feelings and being authentic. Whoever thought about that in relation to confidence or to courage? I never did. So think about those things. Think about, how do I continue to grow? And as I continue to grow, I'll take small steps that are courageous, and I'll give myself credit, and on and on and on. So here's some take-homes from this episode. I want you to stay in the game. Stay in the game. Setbacks are part of life. Keep moving forward. Feel the fear, do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it again. Feel the fear and do it again. And keep putting effort in and recognize your strong suits and your weak points. Draw upon your strong suits. Borrow confidence from other areas of your life and say, I'm going to apply it here too. If you're struggling with confidence or negative self-talk, get whatever help you need to develop those things. And try something every day that's going to strengthen that courage muscle. And I would love it if you'd send me, I just realized that every time over the last couple of years that I've looked for comments on YouTube, I forget where they are. And I am making a very conscious effort. I went in and responded to all the comments last night, and I'm going to make a very conscious effort to respond to comments. So share some comments either in the Berry Aftercare Facebook group about ways you've tackled something that required courage and let us celebrate with you, or send me an email or send me a comment on the Facebook page or through the podcast app where you listen to the podcast. So try something, celebrate yourself, stay in the game. And please share this podcast episode with others. There are so many people who struggle with courage, whether they're in the weight loss arena or not. All of us can use a little boost, and some education and information isn't going to hurt anybody. That's what this podcast is about. Remember, we are talking about your health. Your health is your responsibility. And that goes for today and every single day. So take your health, your mental, physical, spiritual health, and take it seriously and just keep putting forth a little bit of effort every day. And together, we are becoming stronger, more courageous, and happier within ourselves, at peace more and more with ourselves. Thank you for spending your time with me. Happy New Year. Please become part of the Berry Aftercare Weight Loss Winformation group. It's a wonderful, wonderful support group, and we've got some really great tools coming out in just a few weeks, and you're going to want to be part of that. So check it out at www.berryaftercare.com. Thanks for spending time with me, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.